Good morning to everybody. Your Excellency, Professor Benedict Orama, President and Chairman of the Board of Afrexim'S, the representative of the Minister of Trade and Industry of Egypt, Mr. Ali Basha, Madam Managing Director, Madam Awani, Madam President of the African Business Council, Dr. Asfor, my colleagues from the bank, the senior executives at the bank, colleague ambassadors, excellencies, who are here this morning, all of you ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to be here, to be signing today this partnership agreement, this fund management agreement of the base fund of the AFCFTA adjustment facility. I want to thank my colleague, the senior legal officer, Madam Bethlehem Arega. I want to thank also Dr. Zanamwe, as well as Mr. Gable, the consultant, the legal consultant, who have been working very hard over the last few months to make sure that this adjustment facility does indeed become a reality. We arrived yesterday here from the Assembly of Heads of States and Government. President Orama was there. And all of the heads of states and government received a report. And the report was very, very clear from the champion of the AFCFTA, President Isufu. It was very clear on what it is that as Africans we need to do to make sure that this agreement becomes a reality. He emphasized in his report to the heads of states, he emphasized the tools that we need to make sure that implementation of the AFCFTA is successful. One of the tools that he mentioned in his report to the Assembly of Heads of States and Government is the adjustment facility. Because we know that there are many countries that as they implement the reduction of tariffs, the elimination of tariffs, that these countries will experience in the short term revenue losses. So how do we make sure that these countries, that their interests are accommodated? This is where Afrexim'S has stepped in to become a very, very critical pillar of implementation of the AFCFTA by providing this facility of initially $1 billion to make sure that we implement the AFCFTA the way in which we have agreed. There is no other institution that has stepped forward and that has said, we want to contribute to the development of our continent in the way in which Afrexim'S has made available this $1 billion for us to be able to. There is no other institution that has helped us to make sure that the AFCFTA becomes the reality that we want it to become. And so today I am extremely grateful to my senior brother, Professor Orama, Managing Director, Madam Awani, members of the board in its entirety, for approving this facility that will make sure that the AFCFTA is implemented for the benefit of our continent, to advance industrialization, to make sure that our continent is integrated. I think that as we sit here today, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, as we sit here today, we know in this room that we are witnessing a historic moment. I also know that 20, 30 years down the line, today will really be a remarkable historic milestone, because people will look back and they will say, how was this agreement implemented? What are the tools that they used to implement this agreement? And the adjustment facility and the agreement that we're signing today, certainly, in my opinion, is the main tool that we require to make sure that this agreement is successfully implemented. Last month, as you may well be aware, we launched the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System in Accra on the 13th of January. We have, in this partnership between Afrexim'S and the AFCFTA Secretariat, we have, in the shortest period of time, achieved what objectively I would say is remarkable success in how we are going to make sure that trade finance becomes accessible to many Africans, and that trade under the AFCFTA becomes accessible to our small medium enterprises, to young entrepreneurs across our continent. So the payments and settlement system will enable us as Africans to overcome these challenges that we have identified for many, many years. The cost of currency convertibility, the inefficiency of trading with a third currency, the lack of competitiveness that trading with a third currency causes. And so we have to be, as Africans, I believe, we have to be extremely proud that we have now introduced these practical tools to make sure that trade in Africa becomes a reality under the AFCFTA. And I don't think that we would have been able to do it as a secretariat without Afrexim'S. I was told the other day on the flight, somebody said to me, well, you know, Secretary General, we are worried about your partnership with Afrexim'S. We think that Afrexim'S has too much influence over the Secretariat. This is what I was told a day ago. So I listened very, very carefully. And then I said, thank you very much for this feedback. But you tell me, if it is not Afrexim'S, which is the mandate that Afrexim'S has to finance trade in Africa, who's going to do it? Who is going to make sure that small medium enterprises are properly financed, that young Africans have the opportunity to trade across borders on our continent, that there is trade supporting infrastructure on the continent? Who else is going to do it? So I am deeply uncomfortable with the idea that we must accept to work with the World Bank and the IMF, but when it comes to our own institutions on the continent, we raise questions. So I am unequivocal, and I am deeply committed to the partnership that we have. As long as I remain the Secretary General, I told this gentleman, I said, as long as I'm the Secretary General, this partnership with Afrexim'S will continue. It will become stronger because it is a practical step that we have to take to make sure that trade in Africa becomes, across borders, becomes a reality. We cannot, as Africans, continue to go cap in hand to the World Bank, to the IMF, and the others to ask to finance our own trade on the continent. So I would rather go cap in hand to Afrexim'S, to the African Development Bank, Trade and Development Bank, and say, we need you as our African institutions to step up and finance trade, step up and finance our private sector, step up and finance infrastructure that supports trade on the African continent. That's what we have to do. That is what we have to do. I am deeply uncomfortable with the notion that we must go to others in Europe and other parts of the world for them to support us. Afreximbank is owned by us as Africans. It is owned by us. And so, even though I know because of the vision of Professor Orama, we're working very, very well together, but also there is a mandate. There's a mandate that the bank has to support trade finance on our continent. So today is truly a historic day. It is a historic day. It's a day that when people look back, they will say that this is one of the main tools for enabling trade finance, for enabling the implementation of the AFCFTA through the adjustment facility. And so I'm deeply grateful to Afrexim'S, the board of directors, and to our colleagues who made sure that, that this is a reality. Let me conclude by saying something that many of you would have heard me say. And I'm very, very sorry that you have to hear this yet again from me. We are not going to succeed in the implementation of the AFCFTA. We are not going to succeed without Afrexim'S. Because the reality is that you can't negotiate a trade agreement and expect it to implement itself. For better or for worse, I have negotiated many of these trade agreements. And one of the main critique I would put on the table to ourselves as trade lawyers, trade negotiators, is that we negotiate these agreements and then we move on. That's why they don't succeed. That's why there are many around the world who say that why should we care about trade agreements? They just advance globalization. So here we want to make a difference. Here we want to make sure that the AFCFTA benefits not just my friends at Standard Bank or MTN or Glo, any of our big successful corporations, but that it actually benefits millions and millions of small, medium enterprises, the private sector on the continent, the members of the African Business Council that Dr. Asfor represents here today, that the benefits are real and that we see these tangible benefits. If we don't succeed in that, I think that we would have failed. If we don't succeed in making sure that we are inclusive in how this agreement is implemented, I believe we would have failed. As I've said before, if this agreement benefits only South Africa, Kenya, Egypt, Nigeria, the countries on our continent that are already industrialized, that are already relatively competitive, we're not going to succeed in convincing Africans that actually trade does lead to development gains. So we will see a backlash in 20 years' time. That's why this agreement today, that's why this partnership with Afreximbank is so important, because it enables us to address some of these very, very fundamental questions of inclusivity in relation to globalization, trade agreements, and economic development. We have countries that we know today don't have any export competitiveness. We know that. We have countries today that we know in 10 years' time, when they reduce their tariffs to zero, that they will suffer. So who's going to step up to make sure that this particular country that reduces its tariff to zero, that the fiscal deficit that this causes, that it is actually accommodated? If it's not Afreximbank, who's going to do it? Who's going to do it? And so I told this gentleman on the flight, I said to him, please sit here next to me. We have 3 more hours on the flight. Let me tell you something. Sit here. We are not going to be able to succeed if we think the AFCFTA is going to implement itself from a trade policy point of view, from a trade law point of view, without the support, the trade finance support that it needs. We're not going to succeed as Africans. And so I am deeply committed, and I am entirely convinced that the partnership that we have is what our continent requires for us to fundamentally transform the structure of Africa's economy. We can't do it without trade finance. We simply won't be able to do it. It will become just another agreement. It will become just another diplomatic exercise where we come once a year, the Assembly of Heads of States and Government, we take photographs, we pat ourselves on the back, we say, well done, but with no benefit to Africans on the ground. That is why this partnership with Afreximbank is so critical. Let me conclude by saying that I know that I was given only 10 minutes. I told the ministers of trade 2 weeks ago that I've heard about 215 as of yesterday, 215 COVID tests. I go around our continent and I hear, I listen and I hear young women who are owners of small, medium enterprises. I see young entrepreneurs who want to make sure that they access the entire continent and that their businesses succeed. And they say to me, when are we going to see the benefits of this agreement? When are we going to see capital being provided for us to expand from Malawi to Nigeria, from Gabon to Kenya? When are we going to see all of this? This is the practical reality that we require Afreximbank to intensify the ability to finance trade on our continent. And so the board of Afreximbank must realize that we have an obligation, that all of us have an obligation to make sure that this young woman that I refer to, that I met in Malawi, small medium enterprise owner, that she's able to expand her business into West Africa, North Africa, and so on. That's what we need. That's why this partnership is so very important. So I want to appreciate very much the support that we get from Afreximbank, from African Development Bank, and other African institutions, because we cannot. And I want to assure you, I am not going to the World Bank and the IMF with cap in hand asking for support. We cannot do that. We as Africans must now, excuse me, we as Africans must now support our own development, finance our own development. We should no longer continue to go to others to ask them to help us. So I'm very sorry for those, excuse me, I'm very sorry for those who think that when I go to Brussels next week, I'm going to go and ask the Europeans for more. As a matter of fact, I can tell you publicly, I will go to Brussels and tell the Europeans, do less. Do less. Because we are now, as Africans, standing up on our own feet. We're supporting our own development. We have Afrexim'S, we have the African Development Bank. Do less. Do less. We don't need anymore someone to be flown in from Brussels to read Article 19 and say, this is what it says, we're giving you technical support. No, no, we don't need that. We don't need that. So I feel very strongly about this point, and I want to assure you, I'm told the next election for the Secretary General of the AFCFTA is in 2024, in February. I'm prepared to lose the election on this particular point. On this particular point, we are not going to go cap in hand anywhere else except our own institutions in Africa to support the development, the infrastructure that we want to see. That's what we should do. So I want to apologize for speaking too long and for expressing my bias on this issue of Africans having to stand up for the right thing for our continent. I believe that this is the direction that we should take. And I believe that we should be extremely proud of my senior brother, Professor Orama, for the vision and for making sure that we have all the support that we require as Africans to make trade finance a reality. So thank you very much.